Hello, everybody. Welcome to the It Hurts to Mom podcast. I'm Lauren Rose, and today's guest is Andrea Hanson, best-selling author, speaker, master life and mindset coach, and host of the Live Your Life, Not Your Diagnosis podcast. Thanks for coming on, Andrea.
Thank you so much for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your chronic illness journey.
Sure. Well, like you said, I am a master certified life coach, a mindset coach, and I wouldn't really do any of those things, I think, had I not been diagnosed
Mm.
with multiple sclerosis, which is what I am living with. It really set off the importance, I think, and the drive for me to figure out exactly what is mindset, what's going on with mindset, and how can it help me. I was diagnosed a while ago. It's been a while. I was in graduate school and I was getting my master's in early childhood development and disorders. And I was early 20s. I think I was 22 at the time. I was walking down the hall. It was kind of a normal day. I was juggling just papers and books and all sorts of stuff and probably thinking about five different things. And I went to sweep hair out of my face and accidentally poked myself in the eye, like pretty hard. And I do what we normally did, or, what do we all do, which is I wait for it to stop watering. And I kind of blinked a couple of times and I was like, oh, we're okay. Went about my day. And then later on that evening, my vision in that eye started to shut down. It was like somebody was pulling a shade over a window. It just kind of went blank. And I thought it was because I poked myself in the eye. I had no idea, right? Like
Yeah,
this is 2000. And so the year 2000. So it's like, yeah, there was internet, but it wasn't like the mecca of health information like it is today.
hmm
So I didn't, I was like, well, maybe I detached my retina. Yeah, I had no idea. I had no idea what that meant. It just kind of sounded good. And I was like, it has to be, it's got to be something to do with poking my eye. And so I went to the ophthalmologist the next day and she looked at my eye. She was like, this is not a detached retina. And I was like, oh, good. And she's like, yeah, but I think it's something else. And she literally walked me down the hallway because it was like at a hospital where I went, walked me down the hallway to go see a neuro ophthalmologist. He looked at my eye and he said, okay. Uh, and the first thing he said was, is there somebody you would like me to call? And I'm like, what? You know, I was like, I've never had a doctor ask me like if I needed to go get backup, right? I was like, this is weird. And so I was like, yeah, I guess I'll call my parents. And, by later on that night, like literally within a few hours, I was admitted to the hospital. My parents were there and my new MS specialist was there. And we were looking at basically pictures of my brain and what my neuro-ophthalmologist saw, and I think what my ophthalmologist also saw was what I had was something called optic neuritis, which can be very common for people with MS. And it just means that your optic nerve is getting inflamed and it shuts your vision down. And so he saw that right away and called the neurologist and got me in for MRIs and all that kind of stuff. And I was looking at my brain and it was lit up. When you look at an MRI with someone that has lesions on their brain, mostly that I know is from MS. I'm sure there's other things that can cause this too, but they look like really bright lights, like a really bright white spot on your brain. That's not good. And I remember it was lit up like a Christmas tree. Like there were just bright lights all over. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I'm sure he had sent it, a couple of times before, but I wasn't really registering. And so I remember the first thing my neurologist saying is, you were on fire. There's no doubt that you have MS. And I was like, wow. And I don't think I even knew what MS really was. Um, I, I had never known anybody had it. I didn't really have an idea of what it was. And I spent, the next 3 days in the hospital. I was hooked up to steroids, pretty major steroids. I don't know if you've ever had them or anyone listening has ever had the joy of being on steroids. They work, but they're terrible, right? They turn you into an emotional basket case and like totally change your metabolism. It's a whole thing. And so I had 3 days of pretty massive steroids. And I remember, I was getting educated. People were coming in. I was talking with my neurologist a lot, who was fabulous. I still, I mean, he's still a friend. Um, and I remember one woman coming in, and I honestly don't remember if she was a social worker or if she was a nurse. I don't know. She was like a patient care person. But she basically came in and was like, here's what MS is. You can no longer take hot showers. You can no longer stress yourself out. You can no longer do any kind of rigorous exercise. And at the time I was a runner, like and you can no longer do, I mean, just all of these things that I could no longer do. And I remember thinking, I was like, hold up, hold up. I'm like, number one, you don't know me. And I'm like, I literally just took a hot shower like 30 minutes before you showed up, right? Like I take hot showers and it was fine. Like nothing, like what is she even talking about? And so it just became very clear to me that she was not talking to me. She wasn't talking to Andrea. She didn't ask me, hey, what do you notice when you take hot showers? What do you notice when you get hot? She didn't ask me that. She just said, you like at 22, you can no longer take hot showers for the rest of your life. What? And and that was really, I mean, I say it in jest because it's like, who the heck was this woman and what was she doing? And it was just clearly not the right way to talk to somebody who is young, who was just given this pretty devastating diagnosis. But at the same time, I'm grateful because she very quickly made me realize that, oh, now that I'm in this new category, if you will, of having a diagnosis, people are going to see me as the diagnosis. Like this woman is not talking to me. She's talking to MS. She's talking to a name on a chart with a diagnosis next to it and just telling me all these things. She told me that I had to get ready. I had to get my house wheelchair ready.
Wow.
I was, I mean, 23 years later, really nothing that she told me was going to happen has happened. She just had no idea. And so that was really the first time that I realized like, oh, I've got to stand up for myself. I've got to figure out what this means to me. I've got to take control, or else people like her are going to put me in this box and I'm not going to get any help at all because that doesn't help anybody, right? To be talking to a diagnosis or, instead of an actual person. So that was really the first, it was a heck of a way for it to happen. But getting this huge diagnosis, not knowing what was going on, kind of getting thrown into this world of you are now your diagnosis really helped me realize, and I didn't know what it was at the time. I had no idea what was going on besides the fact that I absolutely did not want to be defined by this. And I absolutely was not helped by anybody who was talking to me and putting me in a box of this diagnosis, which honestly, like there are so many different things that happen with MS. It's kind of strange that anybody would be able to be in a box. So that was really the first thing. So before I even really knew what I was doing, I was really taking control of my own story.
Yeah, taking your power back. I think that's
Mm,
awesome. I just talked to another lady. She's a doctor with endometriosis, and we were talking
mhm.
about taking our power back and
Yeah.
separating ourselves from our diagnoses because we're
Mhm.
still ourselves, and those might be a part of us, but it's not our whole being.
No. I mean, it's something I have. It's kind of like saying, I, I mean, it's saying that I have a diagnosis is who I am is it, it just doesn't even really make sense to me. It really doesn't because this diagnosis is something that it's kind of like saying when I get a cold, I am a cold. When I have the flu, I am a flu. When I have COVID, I have, you know what I mean? If I have cancer, I am cancer. It's just not who I am. It's something I'm living with, but it doesn't define me and it's certainly not who I am as a person.
Right. So, I mean, I struggle sometimes with that. Especially when my mental health is not doing great on those bad mental health days.
Yeah.
I have guilt and shame. I have guilt that I can't get enough done around the house. I have
Mm.
shame that I walk with the limp or I have to use the handicap parking spot. Do you ever struggle with guilt or shame, or has your mindset pretty much been permanent?
That's the thing. It's when we talk about mindset, especially practicing a positive mindset or changing your mindset to become more positive, it's kind of like it's like a yoga practice, right? It's you can learn, you can get into yoga and you can learn certain poses, but you're never done with
Mm,
yoga, right? You can take it as far as you want. I mean, there's one of my very best friends is this unbelievable yoga teacher, like she went to India and has her own asana. I mean, it's just, I mean, she is high, high level and you can go there with yoga. Or you can do just a Saturday morning class of, yin yoga for stretching that'll help you feel better. But you can always learn more. You can always practice more. You can always strengthen your practice. It's something that you can always go into if you need it. And that's kind of what mindset is like. So it's never my mindset is done, right?
mm,
Because we all have mindset all the time. You never not have mindset because mindset is basically what is your belief? How are you looking at the world? So there's always a way that we're looking at the world and there's always beliefs that we have. And practicing a more positive mindset just means that you're shifting those beliefs and you're learning how to shift away from certain things that that you believe now that maybe don't feel so great. And you want to shift the way you're looking at life. And it's one big practice. And so in learning this practice, I'm always strengthening it. And so, how that translates, if I'm having time where I feel guilty or feel ashamed, absolutely, I still feel these things.
mm,
100%. It's not about never feeling that. We're always going to have negative, quote unquote, negative emotions because all emotions happen all the time. It's just in strengthening my mindset, I am able to notice those things faster. So before I had a really strong mindset practice, I would feel guilt about something for days, weeks. I would replay if it was something like something that happened with another person, let's just say, I would like replay the conversation in my head over and over and oh, you should have said this and why didn't you say that? And I would ruminate on it and it would just create these feelings, these emotions that just felt ugh for and it would last forever. It would take me forever to get out of that. And now that I have just a more managed mindset, I notice these things more quickly. I notice like, I realize that I'm feeling like, what's going on? Why do I notice that I'm feeling kind of ashamed about something. What is that? What am I feeling ashamed about? Oh, I'm feeling ashamed because I can't do this. Like, perfect example, we were just talking before you started recording. I fell on ice, always fun. And there's just
yeah.
sheets of ice everywhere. I fell in a just spectacular way and hit my head pretty hard and got a concussion. So I can't do, for the last 2, 3 weeks, I'm not able to do like my full productivity. Like I just can't do it. It's one of those things where a concussion is going to take as long as it takes to heal.
Mhm,
And I can either say, like, okay, let's back off. Let's let my brain heal and it's going to heal more quickly. Or I can push it and I can do things that prolong the healing. And so I'm not doing as much and I'm like backlogged. And I have things that I normally like. Normally, I'm such a nerd. I would be done with my taxes by now, and I'm not done. I'm like, oh my god, because I can't have that time on the laptop because it affects my concussion and how my brain is healing. And I feel really ashamed about that. I feel really
mhm,
guilty. I feel um I've got all sorts of feelings about that. And, part of it, I'm like, I should have known that there was going to be a big ice spot there. I should have known that I had to be walking different, it's all of this. And when I look at that with a more managed mindset, I can really tell very quickly, like, okay, I'm feeling kind of ashamed that I even fell to begin with. And I am feeling pretty guilty that I can't get this stuff done. And I have people depending on me asking, like, hey, when is this happening? And when is this happening? And I'm like, oh, I don't know, because I can't do it as much as I did, And I just have a better ability to stop that and not go in there and ruminate on these things, not let it define me, not let it make myself think, like make it mean different things. Like if I had been ahead of things in the first place, it wouldn't have happened, right? It's like that spiral. When
Mhm.
I when you have a well-managed mindset, when you're in the practice of managing your mindset, you're able to stop that a lot more quickly. Doesn't mean it's not going to start, but even if it does start, I don't put as much weight on it. It's more like oh, hey, look at me. I'm feeling really guilty. How interesting. Isn't that interesting that I'm feeling ashamed because I have a concussion, right?
Mhm.
And so it just kind of it lightens things, and it just takes the load off of something where, before I really knew how to manage my mindset, I would spiral. I would feel terrible for days. I would feel totally ashamed that I didn't have my stuff together. It would just be a whole different thing.
The two things that you were just talking about that you kind of mentioned that I really like is
Mm.
one, the fact of noticing what you're feeling sooner
Yeah.
means that you can be proactive and do something about it sooner.
Mhm.
And two, and I was going to say this, but then you said it, it sounds like when you notice these feelings, you are just noticing them without judgment, like we're supposed to do in mindfulness,
Mhm.
exercises. Just notice what you're feeling, don't judge it, don't think if it's right or it's wrong or it's whatever, just
Right.
notice what it is. And I love that.
Yeah, and I'll even build on that. It's also, if you do judge it, because sometimes that happens, don't
Yeah.
judge yourself for judging, right? It's it's like the ultimate in kindness and knowing that at the end of the day, we're humans. At the very
Mhm.
end of the day, right? Sometimes we're going to feel ashamed or guilty or upset about something that has nothing to do with us or is not in our control. And that doesn't mean that we don't have a good mindset. It doesn't mean that we're terrible people for judging ourselves, right? It's going to happen. And so, one of the things, you're right, that having that mindset awareness in management can help you with is being able to like watch your thoughts and realize, like,
Mhm.
oh, you know what? I was just judging myself. Like, I'm totally judging myself for falling on ice. Like, what the heck? But that's okay. Like, I'm not going to judge myself for judging. Like, I'm not going to get mad at myself because I'm judging. It's like, oh, look at me judging myself for falling. And
Mhm.
the ultimate is just whatever we do. If we fall into a spiral, and if we feel really bad, if we judge ourselves, if we're mean to ourselves, whatever it is, it's all okay. And it's not anything to beat ourselves up about.
Yeah, that's hard. I'm pretty good at spiraling.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I mean, because that's almost the way our brains have been built. And because, I mean, if you take it back, right, thousands of years, we needed to think like, oh, there's something
mhm.
down there, or there's danger over here, or, like we needed that. And so we still have that part of our brain. We still have, it's very, very easy to fall into that negative spiral. It's very easy. And sometimes it almost feels good to fall into that spiral. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, like letting your brain just go and
Mhm.
just letting it get into that negative, just like, oh my gosh. Um, it's interesting because it can be naturally just where our brains go. And that's okay. And so when you are in the practice of managing your mindset, you can pull yourself out of that or stop it, a quarter of the way down. So
Right.
you're not spiraling all the way down like maybe
Right.
we used to.
So, what do you think the hardest part of dealing with a chronic illness is?
Gosh, I think that's the kind of thing that everyone's going to have their different answer.
Hmm.
I think my answer is, and it's something that I really, really had to work on when I was first diagnosed, and it took me some time. It was one of the hardest, I think, points for me to turn around, to manage, and it was the idea of not knowing what's gonna happen,
Yeah.
right? It's something where, especially if someone is living with a diagnosis that can just, flip on and something can happen pretty quickly. Um, Sometimes it feels like it's out of the blue, and it it's almost, for the longest time, I struggled with feeling like my MS would blindside me. And all of a sudden, I would have these symptoms. And for people who don't know, the MS is an autoimmune disorder and it affects the central nervous system. So you got to think of everything that your central nervous system controls is basically fair game when you have MS. And so things could happen out of the blue. And I just was always feeling like I had to look over my shoulder. I was always feeling like I wasn't doing enough. This was my fault if I had only done this, or if I only didn't do that. It wouldn't have happened if I only took care of myself more, or like I would be judging myself. I would be really, really hard on myself, and it was all around worrying about just being blindsided by some random MS thing that, would within the first couple of years of being diagnosed, it was crazy. My brain was, I mean, like my doctor said, my brain was on fire and it was acting that way. And so I really did just have the fear. It was just one of the hardest things, more than any of the symptoms or things that um, I had happening, which were pretty major. The fear was the hardest part, I think, of living with this chronic illness.
I think my answer is similar when I thought about it.
Mm,
My original answer was the unpredictability, but then if I
mhm.
dig a little bit deeper, I feel like the root of that is lack of control.
Yeah,
I am powerless over how my body's gonna feel each day.
right.
Yes, I could take medicines, I could stretch this, that, and the other, but it's always the pain is always gonna be there. The autoimmune disease is always gonna be there attacking
Mhm.
my joints and my body, and I can't control that. And so that's a really big deal for me.
Yeah, and you can take that even deeper, right? How does it feel to not be in control?
Mm. It feels really scary.
Mm, yeah.
So we're back to that fear that you were just talking about too.
Mhm. Yeah, fear can come from a lot of different things, and I think something like a chronic illness can really spark it. And that was one of the things that helped me um, get through it and really have it not take over my life so much. I mean, sometimes I would just be frozen with fear. Um, but really acknowledging what it was and realizing what it was, that's one of the first steps to getting out of it and not letting it control your life so much.
So how do you get through your most difficult days? Kind of what gets you through?
I would say kindness, just being kind to myself,
Mhm.
um, giving myself permission to step away from everything and being kind. And so not getting upset when I can't do something or something's going to have to be put off for another day. Um, Letting myself do what I know helps me, which a lot of times is going out in nature, like going on
Mhm.
hikes with my dog, with my husband, and um, allowing myself just to go back to the basics, which is just that connection with people, um, kindness to myself, really getting into, a resting pattern, like allowing myself to rest because I think like a lot of people, it's like, I don't know, I don't rest a whole lot. Like I have to, if I rest, I've got to build it in consciously to
Mhm.
my day because if I let myself, like my natural state is just go, 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 go. And if I can't go, it's fighting against the fact that I can't go, 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 which is still some kind of activity. And so, really allowing myself to rest even longer and more than I normally do. Those are the kinds of things that help me.
Yeah, kindness is one of my core values,
Hmm.
one of my top ones actually. And
Mm,
my
I
therapist and
love
I
it.
were talking recently about, how kind am I to, people in the world? I'm like, well, I'm
Mhm.
very kind to people in the world. She's like, well, how kind are you to yourself? I said, well, that kind of depends.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely working on that and listening to my body and realizing that maybe what my body needs is to rest and trying not to feel guilty for that because that's what my body is telling me that it needs. Or maybe it needs, medication, or maybe it needs some, icy hot on my hip or whatever it
Mhm.
is. But listening to my body and acknowledging it and honoring what my body needs.
Yes. Yes. I love that you said that because there are definitely two different parts to that when we're connecting with our body. We can listen. It doesn't mean that we are honoring it and doing it,
Mhm.
right? And a lot of times, it's like we listen and we know, and then we just blow right past it and don't do it. So that second piece of honoring, like doing what it's basically telling us, sometimes what it's screaming at us to do, that's a really important part.
I've seen you talk about or touch on imposter syndrome.
Mm.
How do you think imposter syndrome affects people with chronic illness?
Ooh, I think it affects us a lot. I think that in just naturally, illness aside, I feel like imposter syndrome gets in the way of things like as we're getting older, as we're stepping into the, professional field, whatever it is that we're doing, as we are getting, stronger relationships, becoming parents and things like that. At all of those stages, we can feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. Like I just don't know what's going on. I don't know enough. I'm not, they hired me for this job, but I'm really not qualified. What am I doing here? Um, I don't want to ask a question, right? I don't want to ask for that second date, right? It can really hit us in a lot of different ways. And then you add that layer of having a chronic illness on top of it. And that's where the results of imposter syndrome can really wreak havoc, to be honest. In, again, in just like humans with no chronic illness, you get, like you're not necessarily going to speak up as much. You're not necessarily, maybe you don't get the promotion or you don't, the relationship doesn't happen or you don't take that leap of faith, right? All of those things. Once you have that chronic illness, what can happen is you can be um, holding back on talking about your symptoms. You can be holding back on
Mm.
asking for help. You can be in a patient doctor relationship. And because you have this imposter syndrome of like, I can't, who am I to speak up? This doctor is who knows everything. What do I know? Right. I mean, sometimes we've just been giving a diagnosis, like me. It's like, I didn't know what MS was.
Yeah.
And we can feel like we shouldn't, we can't speak up because we don't know. And it creates a space where we don't necessarily get the information that we need. We don't necessarily get the help we need. We don't necessarily get the other, all sorts of other types of assistance that we need. Sometimes, I mean, you and I talked about it on my podcast about getting that ADA card. Some people would absolutely benefit from it. but don't want to get it because who am I to do this? There's other people who need it more than me, right? Or I have an invisible illness. And so people are going to look at me parking in that spot and they're going to think I don't deserve it. And maybe I don't deserve it because I can walk. I'm not using a wheelchair, right? So imposter syndrome is something that can affect all of us, especially women. Women get it way more, just because men are generally still just raised to think that they are, belong everywhere. It's just part of the way, men and women are raised differently, and hopefully that is changing. It needs to, but I think that imposter syndrome is something that can happen, that can happen to anybody. It's just that the effects of it, the results of it, when you have a chronic illness, can be that much more dire.
Yeah, and I think one part of imposter syndrome comes down to our self-worth. So
Mhm.
before your mindset shift, how did your lack of self-worth affect you and your business?
Mm. That's an interesting question because I didn't really have a business before I was jumping into that mindset. So when I was diagnosed, like I said, I was pretty young.
Mhm.
I was in grad school, and I was learning things about mindset without really realizing what it was. And so in my program, we were working with the young kids, so like 0 to 3, that had early childhood disorders. So things like Down syndrome, autism, all that kind of stuff. And we were very aware of the dynamics with the parents, with the teachers, with the doctors. I was being trained to go in as kind of a coordinator of everything, of everybody in that little uh, kid's life and helping them. And so we were very aware of the different mindsets that people have, especially of the mindsets of the parents as they were going into things like, the idea of like the loss of the perfect child when they have a baby that has, a disorder or disabilities. And we were very, it was very much instilled in us to say, like, this is not a Downs baby. You would never say, this is a Downs baby. You would say, this is a baby with Down syndrome.
Mhm.
So I was, you know, learning about that standpoint, not from the set, not from like the idea of like, this is your mindset and this is how you do it. It's just that this is one way that people look at things. And this is something very important that we need to instill in teachers and new parents and all this kind of stuff to help this child have as good a head start as possible. So I had that already. And I think that was part of the reason why when that social worker, whoever it was, came in and started talking to me like I am MS, I was like, oh, no, 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 that is not who I am. But I didn't. So I had that and I was working on it. And I didn't really get into being a business owner for quite a few years. And so there was no real business before mindset or before, mindset awareness.
Okay, so you have a podcast, like I said, it's called Live Your Life, Not Your Diagnosis.
Mhm.
You have guests come on and talk about how they're living a great life despite their illnesses. What kinds of things have you learned from interviewing your guests?
So much. So much. I I love, I mean, this is one of the favorite things that I've ever done in my business. Um, I am interviewing people that they all have different diagnoses or, different things. They don't even necessarily have a diagnosis. Just something is happening in their
Yeah.
in their body. Their body is revolting in some, like it's like a revolt in some kind of a way. They just maybe don't know. Um, or it hasn't been pinpointed yet by doctors. And I love talking to people who are living with a diagnosis and are doing amazing things. And I think it's what I love is that it doesn't mean that they are, oh, look, I have this diagnosis and I'm a Fortune 500 company owner, right? It's not even that. Like living a great life with a diagnosis can mean, I interviewed one person who found through using art therapy to help her that she was an amazing artist. And so she went on to, keep doing this art, and she has won so many awards. And I mean, she's doing amazing, amazing things. And, seeing how different people are using their diagnosis almost as a catalyst to kind of switch their life and be like, okay, let's really look at what's happening and what I want to do and what am I passionate about. And there's nothing like a diagnosis to really either switch your priorities or cement your priorities and make you realize that this is where I want to live from. And it's been amazing seeing what everybody has chosen to do. Be it running a business and doing things that help other people with a diagnosis, to doing creative arts, things like that, art in various forms, going into activism and advocacy for other people, and running nonprofits. And it blows my mind how just kind of that resilience that we can have, and also stepping into not just resilience, because resilience means, you have this event like a diagnosis, or I would say it's a longer thing than just a one-time event, but your life is changing because of what's happening. And resiliency is where you can kind of come back up to where you were before, as far as your mentality and what you're doing. And then there's another step that's called post-traumatic growth. And for those who don't know, that means you are coming back from, again, a traumatic event, and you are growing not in spite of it, but because of it. And I would say that's one thing that all of my guests have in common, is they are, whether they know it or not, they are exemplifying this post-traumatic growth and what it can look like. And so I am just always inspired. I love it. It's one of my favorite things. And I think it's just such a great example of how we can not only bounce back, but bounce forward and do these amazing things. It's kind of like what I said in the beginning. I'm not sure. I mean, you never know, but I'm not sure, had I not had this diagnosis, that I would be doing anything that I'm doing today, that I would be paying attention to my mindset, that I would be paying attention to my health as much. I'm not sure I would be doing any of that. And I would argue that I am in a much better situation right now because of my work and my practice with my mindset and my health and what I am doing and putting out into the world. I'm in a much better position than I think I would have been if I was not diagnosed with anything and doing the 9 to 5 and climbing the corporate ladder.
Yeah, it's nearly I don't wanna say impossible because, maybe nothing's impossible, but it's very hard to grow as a person if you're not met with challenges in
Mm.
life,
Yeah,
right?
I would
We
agree.
grow the best from our challenges, our difficult situations, and how we respond to them and how we come out of them and what we do in spite of or because of them.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
So what advice would you give someone who's struggling to not be defined by their illness?
Mm. That can be hard sometimes, right? Especially when you feel like it's everything in your life, right? It's how you feel physically, it's how you feel emotionally, it's limits what you can do. Sometimes it can feel like we're just surrounded by it and there's nothing else. And one thing that I think is, it's one of those quick and easy things that can give you that boost, is I always say, take pen to paper. I mean, of course you can do it on your phone, your laptop, or wherever you want to do it. I like pen to paper because there's something about the connection between what we're thinking and the physical act of writing it down. And there's just something extra that happens that doesn't seem to happen when you're typing. But I would say take pen to paper and just write down a list of who you are, right? Who are you? I am a strong person. I am a teacher. I am a wife. I am a, kind, caring person. I am a student, right? I am a giver, right? Like there's so many things that we can say, I am this, I am that. Do 20 of them and realize that of those 20, your diagnosis is just one of them. And sometimes, yes, it can feel, I mean, that's the balancing act, right? I think the whole balance of things in your life is such a, I don't know where that came from. It's
Yeah.
just not possible, right? Like I think the
Yeah.
work life balance came up first. It's really not. It's just sometimes some things are going to be more prominent in your life than others. And sometimes your chronic illness is going to be more prominent in your life, and that's okay. But remembering that you are so many other things that aren't your diagnosis, and to hold on to that, because one of the things that can happen when we're diagnosed, especially, is it's almost like an identity crisis, right? All of a sudden, it's like, wait a second. I thought, before I was diagnosed, I was going to get my PhD, right? I was on a PhD track. I was going to be a therapist. I was going to go, I mean, I knew exactly what I was going to do, as we do when we're, 20 years old. But, and then all of a sudden it just came crashing down. And I was like, I don't have the luxury of being a student for that long. And I can't, so all of a sudden my identity as a student, as a, someone who is learning, and like that was just gone. And it happens to a lot of us when our body starts doing something just crazy, and we can no longer have that life that we thought we were going to have. All of a sudden we are forced to look at it and say, okay, who am I now? And that's why I said earlier, it's like, sometimes having something like this happen can really cement your priorities and can really cement like, oh, okay, this is important to me. These are my values. And sometimes those are shifted when, kind of the rubber meets the road, which can happen when something as serious as a diagnosis occurs. And it can be this identity shift. And so part of that identity shift can be like, okay, wait, am I my diagnosis now? Because there are plenty
Mhm.
of people, certainly, that are going to act like you are a diagnosis, right? There are plenty of people that are going to do that. Um, Including other people with a diagnosis, right? Like this, there's no safe haven of people that want to define you by that. And it's just a question of deciding, do I want to be defined by this? Right? And if I don't want to be defined like this, what is my new identity? Like, who am I outside of this? Who am I now that this has happened? And like I said, one of the easiest, simplest ways to really start that brainstorm, pen to paper, 20 things. Who am I?
I love that. I love that it is so simple, that it is so practical, and that I do believe it will actually help. I definitely went through an identity crisis. I
Yeah.
spent 2 years in a deep depression when I couldn't work anymore. I mean, I was about to get this great position. I was already really happy, but I was, thought of myself as a successful career woman,
Hmm.
as well as a great mother and wife and all that kind of stuff. And I no longer had that. And so I didn't think I had a purpose in life anymore. And I spent 2 years trying to figure out what that new purpose in life was. So it was definitely an identity crisis. It was really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's interesting because what can happen, it certainly happened to me. It's happened to a lot of people um, that I've talked to that have gone through this type of a identity crisis. And I talk about this on an episode of my podcast about the identity crisis and what can happen. And it can either really strengthen relationships that you have, or it can totally make people like walk away and like, I mean, it sounds bad, but It can, if it's not a strong relationship and it's not based on, right, those values, which, I mean, let's just be totally brutally honest, not all relationships are based on that, right? When I was in my early 20s going through this, my relationships were like, these are my friends that I go to the bar with,
Yeah.
right? So like none of them are ready for the seriousness that was happening to me. And it can happen, but it's part of growing. It's just that sometimes when you have this diagnosis or something happening with your health, it's almost like you're forced to grow and get into this a little bit
Mhm.
faster than you normally would. Like normally maybe it would have happened in your 30s, but no, it's going to happen in the next 2 years. And so, and it's just something that happens with really solidifying who you are now that you have this diagnosis and what's really important to you. And sometimes older relationships aren't going to weather that storm, and you're going to realize that you're not really aligned with people. Uh, and then the new relationships that you get are going to be that much stronger because you already know.
Right. And I think that we have to accept and make it okay that some people aren't, you know, aren't set up for helping us through these health crises.
Hmm.
That wasn't their expectation when they came along. I mean, if we're married, that's different. We made a vow, but
Yeah.
a 20-year-old,
Hmm.
you know, having a friend who's got this serious health diagnosis and is going through an identity crisis, a 20-year-old may not have the tools to be there in the right way for that friend. And it's not their fault. It's okay.
Hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it just, like I said, it can strengthen some relationships, right? So
Hmm.
at that age, some friends 100% stepped up and were there for me, and maybe we weren't such great friends before just because we were, more like maybe acquaintances or something like that, but this really um, brought us even closer. And then, yeah, like I said, some friends were like, "Whoop, I'm out. This is not
Yeah.
this is not what I signed up for." Which you're
Yeah.
right,
And that,
is 100% fine. It's 100% fine. But it's something that I think it's something that can happen. I think it's something that happens in life, but I think it's something that can be accelerated by getting a diagnosis and really stepping into this new identity of like, okay, who am I?
right. Well, we could probably talk for another hour or so, but it's
I
probably time to
know.
wrap up.
So much fun. So much fun.
I know. Thank you so much for coming on.
You're so
Um,
welcome. I loved it.
um, Tell me where we can find more about you and what you do.
So one of the best places is just my website. It's kind of my hub, AndreaHansonCoaching.com. And that's Hanson with an O-N. And you can find me on Instagram at Andrea W. Hanson. I have my podcast, like you said before, Live Your Life, Not Your Diagnosis, where I speak to amazing people like you. And you can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. I have my books. Live Your Life, Not Your Diagnosis is my first book, and then Stop Carrying the Weight of Your MS. These are books on mindset while living with a chronic illness. And you can also on my website find out about my upcoming online course, which is the Live Your Life, Not Your Diagnosis online course.
Very cool. And make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any health, parenting, or life advice. For my freebie, which is 30 ways to relieve pain without taking a pill, go to www.ithurtstomom.com/tips or at @ithurtstomom on Instagram. If you have any comments, suggestions, or want to be on this podcast, feel free to email me at ithurtstomom@gmail.com. I wish you a blessed and pain-free day. Bye.